Lab number 256. In this lab, we will add functionality of JSONStore to our application, meaning that we will try to save data that is pushed to us through push messages. Actually, we will implement the second tab, and any message that delivered to us through push technology will be put to JSONStore in JSON format to our file system-based storage. And once we will navigate to the second tab, we will get all those messages from that storage and display them in that tab. So we will start with returning back our inspection for live reload server. So from Chrome tab, inspect devices, so we will be able to see live updates from device. And then we will need to generate one more service. Let's call it something like storage service. So for that, let's open a terminal and type Ionic. G means generate provider, and then storage service. So as you remember, as it was before, we need to rename right away the JS extension to TS. And then we can open this storage service and remove the things that we don't need. So HTTP part is not needed here. Same as data, all the injections. So all of that is not needed. This check is not needed. Also, we will use this promise construction later on. So for now, I will just comment it. Just like that, and we will use that in a function called getAll. So actually we will have several things defined here. So first one will be init. So this one will be called just to init the JSONStore. This is the standard way of doing things. We will init collection. It will be empty on this stage, or we will init with the data that was before. I mean, in previous app launch, because this storage is available offline. This is the main benefit of it, of course. Then we will have something like put. So for put, we will have input parameter. Let's call it data. And actually, everything that will be passed to us will be stored to JSONStore. And then we will be able to call getAll to get all of that data. So we'll start with init. Let's implement something like logging just for debug purposes. So what we need to do here is first of all to define collection that we will load. So I will have a variable collections, and let's call it something like messages. So inside we need to define at least search fields. And we will have inside text, it will be string, and we'll also have here date, and yeah, it will be simple to just keep it also string. Now we can actually do the inits using the API WL JSONStore, then init. Then we need to pass these collections that we just defined, and we can specify callback right away. So let's have something like success here. And in case of success, we will do the logging. Just like that. And in case of failure, we'll have a failure login here, like this. So now let's add a reference to this to app.ts file. So first of all, as always, we'll need to do import. In this case, this time it's called storage service. Next thing, we need to define it as provider. So again, storage service here. Now we can add a reference here. Just the same way as we did before, and define variable. With type any. And last step will be to actually call init. So let's do it somewhere, for example, here after we have displayed login, and only after that we will start loading our JSON store. So this storage init, like this. So now we can save this app.ts file and see whether it will be loaded or not. So as you can see, the JSON store init success down there, so we can continue. So basically, next step for us is to define two more functions here. Let's continue with puts. We will also add login here at the beginning. And we will log the data that arrived to us as an input parameter. So now we need again to define the collection name, and we also need to define options even if they will be empty. So collection name will be equal to our messages as we defined it right here, and the second one will be options. Empty options. So now we can, again, using the API, first we need to get this collection. And then the collection name. And once we got it, we can add data to it. So this data that is arrived to us plus options. And then we can have these callbacks. Something like success. Or in case of any failure callback should be also defined, of course. And we can again log this data. Something like data added to JSONStore. And failed to add data to JSONStore. Just like that. And finally, third one, get all. So again, we will start with console log. In this case, we'll say code JSONStore get all. And we will use this construction that we prepared previously. So inside we will define first of all collection name, and options we can copy it from previous function. Okay, and finally we will need to use API again, JSONStore get then collection name, and then we can use the find all with passing options inside to get all the documents inside JSONStore, and then we can use the callback, something like results, to do something with it. So let's do some logging first, just for debug purposes, something like messages loaded from JSONStore, and then these messages, so results, just as we have here. And finally we will also resolve this promise that we created previously, passing results inside. And the second option, in case everything will go wrong, so failure, again logging, something like failed to load messages from JSONStore, and let's provide this error. And we also need to resolve our promise, but just let's put there something like error, like that. So now we can save our service. Next step for us is to modify push service, because right in this service we will actually store messages received from push notification to JSONStore, and we will start with adding a reference to this service. So for that we can first of all copy the import line from app.ts. Of course we need to change the path. It will look like this. Next we need to add a reference to it, just the same way as before. Define variable, with type any, and assign it to our storage, like that. So next step for us will be to actually here in push notification received to store that message. So in order to do that, first of all we will define a few new variables. So in first we will get the current timestamp, because we will put in JSONStore the message, meaning that alert that we will have the text that we'll receive from push messaging and the current timestamp. So let's start with timestamp. Let's call the variable something like TS, and with pure JavaScript new date and just get time, like that. So here we will have our timestamp. Let's define a second one, something like message. And from here we can construct the JSON that we will put in JSONStore. So we'll have text equal to message alert that we got as an input parameter. And then we will have date equal to our timestamp that we just created. And now we can use this storage put function with the message passed into it as an input parameter. The only thing is that unfortunately we won't be able to access this due to the way how Angular 2 and Ionic 2 on top of it works. If we're defining the functions in the old style, like function, then it won't be actually this of this variable that we defined. And in order to access it, well, let's call it scope in an old style way, we need to actually change the way how we define our functions from pure JavaScript to the Angular 2 way. So instead of function here, for example, it will look like this, like we were defining our callbacks previously with them. And the same for each and every function, callback. And same here for push notification. So actually now we can move it level up because it's not anymore need to be inside our MFP push initialize or inside the load function. So we can put it outside. But again, in order to still have the proper access to these variables, we will need to redefine it in Ionic 2 way, and it will look like this. So just one equal sign more, and starting from that moment we can access these variables in such construction. And finally we will need to change the way how we defined callback to say that it will be this function. So now we can save push service and wait until our live reload will reload the app to see if push is still working. Hopefully yes. In case it will be working, at the end when we will receive a push message, we will be able to put it to storage. Okay, let's log in with equal credentials. So JSONStore init still working. Let's try push. So for that we need to go to console. Let's refresh the page in order to reestablish the session. Okay, so we have a test push message. So once we will click OK, we probably should be able to put it to JSONStore. If everything will work, yep, you can see the data is added to JSONStore. So the next step for us, and the final actually, will be to get this data once we are navigating to tab 2. So let's go to page 2 TS, and we will need to import our service first, so we can copy the line from page 1 and pass it to page 2 TS, changing the service name to storage instead of employee. And the pass also needs to be changed. Like that. So now again, reference. Let's define a variable for it. Let's also have some login, so we will know when page 2 init will happen. Something like it was in page 1. So page 2 init, and just like that. And here we can call, let's have function something like load news. So we will need to define this, of course. And with this function, we will actually get data from our JSON store. So this storage then get all as we defined, and then we can specify the callback. So results in case of everything successful, and of course some failure in case everything will go wrong. And we can add some logging here. News loaded, for example, and then our results. And here we can have something like failed to load news and our failure. That's it. Let's save this page 2 TS and see how it will work. Okay, let's go to tab 2. Excellent. So we loaded news. Inside we have a JSON. Inside JSON we have date and text, just as we put it there. Cool. So let's create one more variable here, something like news, for example. Again, with type any. And once we loaded these results, we will assign this news to results that we got, just like that. And we will also need to modify our HTML file to represent those results. So for that, let's go to HTML and let's check what we have in Ionic docs. Something interesting. Let's use cards component for that. So we'll have cards with headers. Inside the header we will have date, and inside content we will have content. So copy this code and pass inside our content. just like that. And then we can implement a similar repetition to what we had in page 1 with ng4. So you can just copy this example and pass it to page 2 HTML. We don't need index actually. And item of news. So here we should have actually item JSON, as you remember, and then inside we should have date, and we will use pipe. So Ionic 2 and Angular 2 are using pipes similar to what we had actually in Angular 1. So we can specify the date pipe, which is there by default to actually transform the timestamp into date format. And the second thing that we will do here is we will display also the text. And finally, let's change the title to something like latest news. And we can save this page to HTML file. So let's wait until our live reload will work to see if our changes applied in the way how we desired it. Okay. Let me send one more push, so it will be more interesting with several cards. So something like that. Okay, so now when we will navigate to tab 2, we should see 2 cards with news inside. So let's see if that will happen. Yep, excellent. So we are seeing this is the test news, and we are seeing second article, and all of that is loaded from JSONStore. So basically that's it. On this step we are finishing this lab. Thank you.